Good evening, everyone. I'm really sorry about the delay. I'll explain in a minute. We are going to get started. It's going to be a slightly shorter than usual episode, given the screw up, but we are having an episode. Okay, good evening, everybody. Welcome to tonight's belated episode of Paranormal Encyclopedia. Sorry about the delay. I haven't been feeling well, and my work schedule got shifted around because I took Halloween off so we could do the 50th anniversary special and everything. But we are going to still have an episode. It's just going to be an abbreviated one. So I don't have a whole lot of time tonight, unfortunately, because of work. So I had to figure out what to talk about. So tonight we're going to talk about conspiracy theories. Real briefly, going to talk about Illuminati, Holocaust denial, 9/11 stuff, etc., etc., etc. And I'm also just to keep us all in the realm of reality, I'm going to talk about a couple of conspiracies that really did happen. So, of course, where are we going to start with conspiracy theories? Let's start with the granddaddy of them all, the Illuminati. Now, just about everybody's probably, at this point, I think, heard of the Illuminati. It's supposedly the super secret organization all over the world that controls everything. What's interesting, there are the believers who insist, yes, it really exists. Some speculate that it's the highest levels of the Freemasons. Some speculate that it's an independent thing. I've seen it said that they were enemies of the Masons, allies of the Masons. Nobody friggin' knows. But what's interesting, I think a lot of people don't know, is there really is, or at least there really was, an Illuminati. So the real Illuminati, which is the plural of Latin Illuminatus, meaning enlightened, in the real world was a group started in Bavaria on May 1st, 1776. The official goals were to oppose superstition and religious influence on public life and the abuses of state power. What's interesting is the guy who actually started was Adam Weishaupt, born 1748, died in 1830. And he was actually a Jesuit. He wasn't a Jesuit himself, but he was trained, had gone to school with the Jesuit order, and was an admirer of theirs. Now, the Jesuits got in trouble with the Catholic Church in this time period. Actually, in point of fact, apparently he was the only non-priest professor at a Jesuit institution. Now, the order was dissolved in 1773 because of various issues with the church. And it's thought, for the most part, that in reality, the real reason he started the Illuminati was to oppose the power of the Roman Catholic Church, specifically because he was ticked off about what they had done to the Jesuits. Forgive me for reading, like I said, really off-kilter night. The thing is, the Illuminati did definitely exist. We know this. We have evidence of this. That group, the original Bavarian Illuminati, though, doesn't exist anymore. Basically, it came down during the 1797-98 era, and the last of it was wiped away by the early 1800s. Various groups by that name keep popping them up from time to time. There are a couple of fraternal organizations today descended from them that use the term Illuminati. Illuminati Order, Illuminati is a level within the Ordo Templi Orientis. People have this idea that the Illuminati is this giant world-spanning organization that controls everything. There's no evidence of it. And usually it gets tied into even crazier conspiracy theories, like, with 9/11, there's the usual thing that gets touted around that it was an inside job by the U.S. government. But if it wasn't the U.S. government, it might have been Israel and Mossad. And if it wasn't Mossad or Israel or the U.S. government, it may have been the Illuminati. And if it was the Illuminati, it might have been all three. Yeah, the Stonecutters would be a parody of the Freemasons, which are possibly the least secret society in the world. There are a lot of theories about the Freemasons, mostly because of the fact they do keep their meetings and some of their information secret. The reality, as far as I have ever been able to figure out, is it's a rich guys club. They tend to seem to have a lot of power because a lot of very important people have been Freemasons. Benjamin Franklin was definitely a Freemason. Several of the other founding fathers and several of the presidents have been Freemasons. But again, there's not a lot of evidence of this grand world-sweeping conspiracy. In general, history is a little less insane than people think it is. So let's talk real quick about the 9/11 truther movement, because it's probably the next big one. I really don't like the truthers. I sort of hesitate to bring this up just because of the fact that a lot of good people died that day. And it bothers me to make up nonsense about them. The thing is, a lot of what the truthers say is either completely untrue or unverifiable. And a lot of it is actually complete bullshit. Like, a bunch of the ones that are anti-Semitic in their theories will say that, there were no Jews present that day. Yes, there were. Jews died along with everybody else. The people will say, well, steel can't melt, at the temperatures that would have been caused by jet fuel fires. Maybe not, but here's the other thing. Steel doesn't need to melt to bend. Metal bends, the structure falls. The other one you'll hear a lot is that the towers fell at free fall speeds. That doesn't mean, one, no they didn't. Two, that doesn't really mean anything. They fell exactly in the way you would have, all the engineers who've looked at it have agreed that he fell exactly in the way, all the serious engineers that look at it agree, he fell exactly the way you would expect the buildings to fall if two planes full of fuel hit them. Let's see, what are some of the other common ones? Just sort of a big one. There's also the fact, the Al-Qaeda took credit for the attack. It's not racist to blame it on that's one of the dumber things I've been accused of. It's not racist or Islamophobic to blame it on Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda is an extremist terrorist group, not mainstream Islam. Another thing that goes right along with that is that people say, people inside saw evidence of controlled demolitions, and supposedly there were explosions going off inside. Here's the thing. To blow up a building, especially one the size of the World Trade Center, which was huge, would have taken months of work. And people are like, oh, well, they just did it at night. They don't understand the kind of work required to pull it off. They would have had to tear open walls so they could affix the explosives to the support beams. It would have taken months of work. Somebody would have, people working in the building would have noticed this massive construction project going on for months, even if it was done at night. There's no possible way it could have been done without that. There's a whole bunch of other things The Simpsons predicted it, sort of. The Lone Gunman predicted it, or at least suggested the idea in the first one and only episode of the show involved the Lone Gunman trying to stop attack like this from happening. It's weird. I won't deny that that's a little strange. On the other hand, think of all the things that have happened in pop culture that never happened in the real world. If you keep looking through, think of all the media that we have. Think of all the TV shows, movies, cartoons, comic books, etc. that exist, and think of all the crazy ideas they all come up with. It's not that strange that occasionally something happens, like something in a TV show. And realistically, if there was a super secret organization running the world, like the conspiracy theorists say, why would they advertise what they were about to do? It doesn't make it'd be stupid. For God's sakes, it'd be nice if one of these people who think that they found the signs proving September 11th was going to happen figured it out before September 11th happened and did something about it, wouldn't it? Another big one you'll get a lot is the moon landing hoax. Supposedly, we didn't land on the moon, or if we did, we landed later than we actually did. And they base this on a whole lot of nonsense for the most part. They say that the flag is fluttering in the breeze when they stick it in the ground, and of course there's no wind on the moon, because there's pretty much largely no atmosphere. The flag's not fluttering. Watch the video. The astronauts holding the flag, turning it back and forth to get it into the ground, and it's causing the flag to move. When he lets go, it actually does. It does stop moving. It behaves exactly the way it should behave, because yes, it's not a wind moving it; it's a guy. And there's various other things that supposedly we couldn't have gotten through the radiation, survived to trip through the radiation belts. We did. Apparently, we did. Another real simple experiment. If you actually watch Mythbusters, did a very good episode about the moon landing hoax thing, and they tested a bunch of the goofy theories people have about how it happened and how it should have. How they think it should have happened. But a reflector was left by the Apollo capsule when they landed. You can reflect a laser off of it and bounce it back to the Earth. It's been done. They do it on the show. Other people, lots of other people have managed to do this. It's not particularly difficult. You just need a laser strong enough and the equipment to pick it up when it comes back. It can be done. It has been done. And no, despite what people think, it's not that the moon's really reflective in that area. It's not. When people come up with these new explanations of, the moon's really reflective, it's confirmation. It's confirmation bias. It's just, I'm going to think of a new theory to explain why I'm not wrong. Let's see, other big conspiracy theories. I know I'm kind of rushing, but... And realistically, I can slow down because I do have to go to work tonight, but it's not like I'm in that much of a rush. Thinking I find the nonsense conspiracy theories annoying. I'd rather talk about what really happened. There's the Holocaust. Another one of the groups that really pisses me off. Holocaust denial. The first thing to notice about, most Holocaust deniers either say, "Oh, it didn't." They don't usually say it didn't happen at all, and somewhat more that, "Oh, the number of people that were killed was grossly exaggerated. It wasn't deliberate execution. It was tough working conditions and terrible living conditions, not a direct attempt to kill people." I'm sorry. This just it just pisses. Oh, and the other common argument they make is there weren't enough Jews in Europe at the time. Okay, and you can look this up. Don't take my word for it. Google it, research it yourself, educate yourselves. But the Nazi census that was done said there were 11 million Jews in Europe. Estimates say somewhere between 5 and 7 million were killed. Usually people say 6, which is actually one of the lower estimates. There are estimates that go much higher. There are some estimates that go lower. Most historians tend to seem to agree around that was between 5 to 6 million. But the thing is, yes, there were enough Jews in Europe for this to have happened. And the other thing to realize is the Nazis had a pretty broad view of what made you Jewish. If you can look it up. The genealogies they did to prove genetic purity and other idiotic nonsense. It wasn't too hard for them to define you as a Jew if they wanted to get rid of you, and they did. And the evidence does exist. What's very, very interesting, another thing I encourage people to research, is that when the war ended, General Eisenhower sent military photographers to concentration camps to photograph everything. He knew then that people were going to say it didn't happen. Yes, we have found gas chambers. We found the plans for gas chambers. We found the plans for the Nazis to do this. They destroyed most of the records, mostly because they knew they knew the war was over. They were trying to cover their asses. And here's the other thing I think it's important to realize. If you listen to most deniers, not all I assume, but everyone I've ever talked to or read something by, there's a subtle and sometimes not very subtle implication that what they're actually saying is the Holocaust didn't happen, and that's terrible. Most of these people are anti-Semites, and there's an agenda to what they're doing. And there's an irony to their agenda, because here's the thing. Supposedly, this is all some elaborate plan by Israel. And Israel received money in reparations for the people that died in for Holocaust survivors. In some ways, they actually got more money the more people who survive, because it's money to help the survivors and their descendants. They don't have a vested interest in lying, in exaggerating the numbers. You see a lot of, and to illustrate my point, you see a lot of Holocaust denial among leaders in Iran and the more extremist countries in the Middle East. Again, people who have a vested interest in discrediting Israelis and Jews in general. The evidence the Holocaust happened is substantial. I'll give you another example. Drew, my co-host, pointed out at one point. There is less evidence that the Civil War happened than that the Holocaust happened. I've never heard anyone say the Civil War didn't happen. For Pete's sakes, people, the evidence, there is some substantial evidence that the Holocaust happened. There's no compelling reason at all to say that it didn't. And one other thing I want to mention, because this is another thing that throws people. People look at 6 million, and then they look at the numbers that have become more popular or more prominent these days, that it was actually between 9 and 12 million people killed in the Holocaust. They're like, well, what's with the change? There's no change. If you're not clear about this, let me explain. About 6 million Jewish people were killed in the Holocaust. Jews were not the only people the Nazis slaughtered. The remaining 3 to 6 million, that brings us to 9 or even 12 million, are the Romani, also known as the Gypsies, homosexuals, Roman Catholics to a point, Freemasons, Jehovah's Witnesses, people with disabilities, which is actually where the Holocaust started, was the disabled, and particularly the mentally disabled. There were more people that died than the Jews. There were no single group lost more people in the Holocaust than the Jews, don't get me wrong. But the reason why the number that's talked about in recent years is so much higher than just the 6 million is because people are starting to deal with the fact more people died. It's not because, they're saying more Jews died, it's that they're saying, oh, right, there's all these other groups that were pointlessly murdered by these assholes. Let me see if I can get specific numbers. Just to give you an idea. Hold on. Okay, let's try this. Okay, so from United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, the number of deaths, up to 6 million Jews, Soviet citizens, probably around somewhere in the neighborhood of 7 million, 1.3 Soviet Jewish civilians, Soviet POWs, 3 million. Non-Jewish Polish citizens, around 1.8 million, including between 50 and 100,000 members of Polish elites. Serb citizens on the territory of Croatia, Bosnia, and Herzegovina, 312,000. People with disabilities living in institutions, up to 250,000. The Roma, the Gypsies, 196 to 220,000. Around 1,900 Jehovah's Witnesses. Repeat criminal offenders and so-called social and asocials, at least 70,000. German political opponents and resistance activists in Axis-occupied territories, undetermined. Homosexuals, hundreds, possibly thousands, also counted in part under the 70,000 repeat criminal offenders and so-called asocials noted above. So yeah, a lot of Jews were killed. They weren't the only people that were killed. That's why the number's growing. It's talking about the other one. And yeah, Serenity's right. Another part of the problem you run into is Hitler was very smart in his targeting. How much, certainly based on his writings like Mein Kampf, he had an intense personal hatred of the Jews. But if you look at the people he chose, the people that were the targets of the Holocaust, they're people that historically and in many parts of the world even today were widely disliked and mistrusted. It's an ugly truth that anti-Semitism, aside from being widespread today in the United States and worldwide today, was extremely widespread in the United States during the Second World War. There's a reason why when the Germans tried to deport the Jews, countries wouldn't take them. The Romani as well had the same issue. Even the term gypsy, which I keep pointedly not using, is generally seen as a slur because it was a group, specifically of Romani, that they went to the one king and they claimed to be from Egypt, hence Egyptsy, and ran a con on him. And yeah, the reality is they've widely been mistrusted and disliked, seen as thieves, vagabonds, tramps, other horror. He didn't target popular people. He targeted people that people didn't trust. He targeted people that people didn't like. It was very easy to single them out. A related subject to this, I think that's worth talking about, is the Catholic Church's perceived involvement in the Holocaust. Particularly because it gets exaggerated to the high heavens. Now, there were Catholic priests in a number of countries and there were Nazis that sided with the Nazis, unfortunately. Several Nazis, including some high-ranking members, were Roman Catholic. Best evidence says Hitler was not, despite what everybody thinks. Which is where Hitler's religious beliefs are really a show into themselves. But insofar as he ever claimed to be Christian, he associated himself with a movement that was known as Positive Christianity. Positive Christianity was a 19th century perversion that claimed that Jews were evil and that basically the Bible could not be trusted because it had been tainted by the Jews and they needed to bring it back from that mess that supposedly had been done to it, which is utter ridiculousness, but it's not as simple as to say, oh, he was just Roman Catholic. Historians are widely divided on what his religious beliefs are. I do intend to do an episode down the road about the occultism among the Nazis and Hitler's beliefs fall more prominently there. Certainly a number of other important Nazis were decidedly not Christian. The most obvious one being, of course, Heinrich Himmler, the architect of the Final Solution, who was into all sorts of insane occult practices and nonsense. But there's something in particular I want to bring people's attention to, because it's not well known, which is Brennender Sorge. Brennendersorge. This is an encyclical from Pope Pius XI. And it's important in a lot of ways. People say that the Pope never spoke out against the Nazis. That's not true. Brennender Sorge, with burning concern, was written in 1937. The text is available online. The encyclical was issued by Pope Pius XI, but most likely the Secretary of State at the Vatican at the time. The man who would become Pope Pius XII, who was the one most often wrongly called the Hitler's Pope, had a large hand in writing this. The text speaks about anti-Semitism. The text speaks about a mad prophet. It's very pointed. It doesn't mention Hitler by name, but it's not hard to figure out who they mean. And what's unique about this encyclical is, the church, papal encyclicals are nothing new. They've been going on for hundreds of years. All of them have a couple of things in common. Particularly, they're all written in Latin, with one exception. In the entire history of the Roman Catholic Church, only one papal encyclical was ever written in a language other than Latin, which would be with burning Surge, with burning concern on the Church and the German Reich. It was written in German. It was smuggled into Germany out of fear of censorship, and was read from the pulpits of all of the German churches on one of the busiest Sundays, Palm Sunday, March 21st. March 21st is a big day in Catholicism. Most Catholics would have been in church, unless they were working or otherwise unable to do so. Yes, there's truth about them working political deals with Mussolini and with Hitler, and then, but the thing to realize there is, yes, they brokered political deals with the Nazis that they then used to save human lives. Or in sometimes tried to use to save human lives. Let me give you an example. Pope Pius made a deal with the president of Brazil. Let me get the exact details. Under Pope Pius, is again the one that people call Hitler's Pope. Catholic institutions were opened as safe havens for the Jews. The Vatican itself was used for that purpose. In fact, when the fascists took power in Italy and they fired Jewish scholars who were working for the Italian government, the Roman Catholic Church hired them. Basically, the reason why he made the deals that he did was so that he could use diplomacy to aid those that were being persecuted. He was widely praised at the end of the war, particularly by leaders of various Jewish groups, for what he had done for them. There's an Israeli historian called Pinchas Lapide, who interviewed war survivors and concluded that Pope Pius XII was instrumental in saving at least 700,000, probably as many as 860,000 Jews from certain death at Nazi hands. Now, in fairness, a lot of historians dispute this number, whereas Rabbi David Dallin called the definitive work by a Jewish scholar on the Holocaust. For that matter, when the Nazis occupied Italy, they demanded a ransom in gold from the Jews. The Catholic Church paid it. Pius was very careful and very political in how he handled the situation, because he realized the ugly reality of the way that Nazis were handling things. I mean, after Benendir Surge was published, There were serious reprisals against Catholic priests and monks, particularly in Poland. Um, so he was careful about the idea of outright opposing the Nazis, but he did a substantial amount of work behind the scenes to save human life. Hey, Lord Ruin. Here's the irony, and I don't want to touch too much on the JFK assassination, but it applies here as well. I don't know who killed JFK. The simplest in me tends to think it was Oswald. I don't know for sure. I've never done that much research into it. But there's a movie by Oliver Stone that most of you have probably heard of called JFK. Now, the movie JFK and this Hitler's Pope nonsense have something in common. During the Cold War, the Soviet Union, particularly its intelligence branch, the KGB, conducted what it called active measures. Active measures were a concerted effort by the Soviet Union to wage psychological warfare against the capitalist Western Europe and particularly the United States, and more specifically to discredit organized religion, particularly the Roman Catholic Church, because the Soviets, being communists, had a long-standing problem with Roman Catholicism. We now know, and you can go ahead and look this up. Don't take again, as we say all the time, Google it. Don't take my word for it. We now know, based on declassified documents from the KGB, that two of the plans that they engaged in during the Cold War were, one, spreading theories that Lyndon B. Johnson and the CIA were behind the Kennedy assassination. And in fact, the book that the movie JFK was based on was written by someone who was known to have ties to the Soviet Union and is generally thought to have been a collaborator. One of the other things that we're working on was the job of discrediting the Catholic Church, particularly by tying it to Nazi Germany. So a lot of we've talked a little in the past about how some of U.S. history, of world history and U.S. history, has been, or particularly in the United States, history has been rewritten by Protestants to shine Catholics in a worse light. The Soviets were doing the same kind of thing for similar reasons. They just were anti-religion instead of trying to make their religion sound better. And it's quite interesting and it's quite disturbing. But I think this is a good segue. We're getting near the end of the point when I'm going to have to sign out because of work. So I want to talk a little bit about real conspiracies. This is stuff that we know actually happened. There's excellent records of the fact that this actually happened. And since we've been talking about the Nazis, the obvious place to start a discussion of real conspiracy theories would be Unit 731 in Operation Paperclip. A lot of my listening audience probably has never heard of either of these things. Many of you have, I'm sure, because, again, we have smart listeners. But, and I'm not saying if you haven't heard of it, you're stupid. It's just that these are topics that are, for good as we'll see, for good reasons, they're not talked a lot about in the United States, particularly education system or U.S. culture, because they're black marks on U.S. history. So, World War II is coming to an end. Nazi Germany is lost. Imperialist Japan is lost. They're just wrapping things up, and they're getting ready. They're setting up the Nuremberg and the Tokyo war crime trials. Oh, okay. So apparently, the cartoon that I personally can't stand, that my fiance likes, Archer, has brought up Operation Paperclip. But so real simple. What happens is the war's coming to an end. And while a number of important scientists, particularly Albert Einstein, had fled Germany to get away from the Nazis, the reality is the Nazis had a number of very good scientists working for them. A prime example of this is a gentleman by the name of Werner von Braun. Werner von Braun was a rocket engineer. He and his team designed the V-2 rockets for Nazi Germany. Um, but the thing is that von Braun was not primarily interested in war. He was interested in space exploration. But yeah, the V2, for those who don't know, by the way, was the world's first long-range guided ballistic missile. It was used as a vengeance weapon, designed to attack Allied cities as a retaliation for bombings against German cities. It's the first artificial object to cross the boundary of space, with a vertical launch June 20th, 1944. So the thing is, as I just said, this thing was the first man-made rocket to reach out into outer space. The U.S. government and the Soviet Union were understandably rather interested in this. They were interested in the chemical weapons research that had been done by the Nazi doctors in the concentration camps, and the Japanese were getting to Unit 731. And there's a problem. The OSS, which is the Office of Strategic Services, what would eventually turn into the CIA, wants to hire these scientists. It wants to put their technical information to work for the United States government. In addition to that, there are a number of important SS and other German intelligence officers who had vital information about the Soviet Union, which was becoming seen as an emerging threat. I mean, keep in mind, if you didn't know, General Patton wanted to march on from Berlin to attack Moscow. So they were definitely seen as a threat. But they wanted these German spies that knew about the Soviets. They wanted these German scientists who had designed things like the buzz bombs and the V2 rocket. And Harry S. Truman, the president, signs an executive order. Let me get the name of the exact executive order. So, 1945, end of the war. Of course, the Allied victory was May 8th, 1945. Truman would formally authorize the order in August of 1945. He expressly excluded anyone to have been a known member of the Nazi Party and more than a nominal participant in its activities or an active supporter of Nazi militarism. The problem was that this immediately ruled out most of the people the government wanted, including von Braun, Kurt H. Debus, Arthur Rudolph were important rocket scientists, as well as the physician Herbertus Strughold. It was earlier classified as a menace to the security of the Allied forces. So their solution is what became known as Operation Paperclip. Operation Paperclip was work by the OSS to create dummy backgrounds for these people. It eliminated or at least minimized any connections they had to the Nazi Party, and covered up any accusations of war crimes. Now, Braun himself wasn't accused of that many war crimes, thankfully. But the thing is, this guy was a member of the Nazi Party. He was a major within the SS. I'm still trying to find the executive order in question. He was well aware of the fact they were using slave labor in the camps to build the rockets, though reports say that he was horrified by this fact. But we gave him a job. He wound up working for not NASA quite prominently, and how was him and his team, and this was many of the same people that designed the V-2 rockets for Nazi Germany, designed the Saturn II rocket, the first rocket to put a Western satellite into orbit, using designs based on the V-2 rocket. And to be fair to Braun, he wasn't real popular among the Nazis. He actually was sent to prison by the Nazis, primarily for the fact that he was more interested in space exploration than he was in waging war. Okay. And there were other people that were much worse than him, is the other thing to realize, that the U.S. government kept out the war crimes trials and gave jobs. Kurt Blom is another one. He was high-ranking Nazi scientist during the Second World War, Deputy Reich Health Leader. He was arrested on May 17th by an agent of the U.S. Counterintelligence Corps, which is an Army intelligence service, in Munich. No papers except for his driving license. They checked out who he was, realized who he was, took him to Kranzberg Castle, which is a medieval castle north of Frankfurt. He was given a job, essentially. Even though what we realized about this guy is he'd been studying bacteriological warfare, although officially he was doing cancer research. He admitted that he had been ordered in 1943 to experiment with plague victims in the plague vaccines in the concentration camps. He was tried in the doctor's trial in 1947 on charges of practicing euthanasia, extermination of sick prisoners, conducting experiments on humans. He was acquitted, even though his earlier admissions were well known, and it was generally accepted that he had indeed participated in gruesome experiments. There is evidence that he in fact experimented with sarin gas on prisoners at Auschwitz. It's believed, though we can't prove it, that it's not proven, particularly because a lot of this is still classified, that the U.S. government intervened and saved him from the gallows. In return, he provided us with his information about his experiments in Dachau and his advice on developing our own German warfare program. 2 months after his acquittal, he was transferred to the United States and interviewed at Camp David, Maryland, about biological warfare in 1951. He was hired by the U.S. Chemical Corps to work on chemical warfare. And, his file neglected to mention the Nuremberg trials. He was later arrested by the French authorities and convicted of war crimes and sentenced to 20 years in prison. This is a real good example of Another real good example is a guy by the name of Nicholas Klaus Barbie, the Butcher of Lyon. This guy was an SS officer in Lyons, France, go figure, from Butcher of Lyon, who ordered the extermination of thousands of Jewish people, including many orphans and children. He was a SS officer. He had a lot of information about the Soviets. He was hired after the war by the Soviet Union. And then, after we found out and got a hold of him, we recruited him and put him to work for the U.S. government in Bolivia, spying in Bolivia. Then when he was on vacation in Europe, he was identified, caught, and put on trial for his crimes. We gave these bastards immunity after they did horrific things. And some of these people, Blum was experimenting with biological weapons on concentration camp survivors. Braun designed the Vengeance rockets that were used on Allied forces. Barbie killed thousands of, and tortured thousands of people. The U.S. government gave them jobs. You don't need to make crazy, nonsensical conspiracy theorists. This shit actually happened. And there's a whole other thing that people are usually even less aware of than Operation Paperclip, and that's Unit 731. So it's pretty well known in the United, I think, that the Nazis were into some really screwy experiments. Joseph Mengele and all the sick things that he did, and some of the other scientists that worked with him. What's less well known is the fact that the Japanese were doing their own sick medical experiments on POWs. Specifically under what was known as Unit 731. Unit 731 was a military organization dedicated to the study of biological and chemical warfare. Some of the experiments we know they conducted. They would put people into hyperbaric chambers to expose them to various extremes of pressure to determine what happens to the human body in various extremes of higher or lower pressure. They would freeze parts of human bodies solid and then just let them thaw just to see how the thawing rate happened in different parts of the body and what sort of damage was done. They would inject people with venereal disease, calling it a vaccination, and then leave it untreated so that they can monitor the way that it passed through the human body. They were offered a deal at the end of World War II by, actually, was it Eisenhower? But they were offered a deal in which they turned over their research to the United States government, and they were spared execution in the Tokyo War Crimes trial. And the thing is, the records of the Tokyo War Crime trials proved all of this stuff, which is this isn't, again, not crazy conspiracy theory, this is historically documented, was covered up. It was barely mentioned during the trials. And then there's other things that have happened since, some of which were probably done at least partly with the help of these scientists that were hired by the government. Particularly, I'm thinking of the Tuskegee experiments. There are experiments where the U.S. government infected African American men with syphilis, saying it was vaccination, just to study the way that syphilis spread through the population. There's, what's the other one I'm trying to think of? MK Ultra is another fun one, which is a massive experiment conducted in the 60s by the CIA at a number of prominent institutions, studying mind control, using hypnosis and LSD to try and influence people and create this idea that you'll see in fiction sometimes called a sleeper agent, where the person goes about their life normally until a certain trigger happens, and then they go off and commit an assassination or spy for the government, and then they go back to the normal lives, and their main person, as a secret person, subconscious personality underneath the main one, that the normal person has no idea is there. Okay, to give you an idea, this ran from the 1950s, officially being sanctioned in 1953. It was reduced in 64, then more so in 67, and then ended in 1973. It broke a lot of U.S. laws, using U.S. and Canadian citizens as test subjects without their consent, or at least without informed consent. They didn't know what was being done to them. They were trying to manipulate mental states and brain functions using the administration of drugs, particularly LSD and other chemicals, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, isolation, verbal and sexual abuse, and various forms of torture. It went across 80 different institutions, including 44 colleges and universities, as well as hospitals, prisons, and pharmaceutical companies. See, it operated these institutions as front organizations, although sometimes top officials at the institutions were aware of what was going on. And just again, in case you want to think that this is some crazy nonsense made up, the U.S. Supreme Court commented MKUltra was concerned with the research and development of chemical, biological, and radiological materials capable of employment in clandestine operations to control human behavior. The program consisted of more than 149 sub-projects, which the agency contracted out to various universities, research foundations, and similar institutions. At least 80 institutions and 185 private researchers participated. Because the agency funded MKUltra indirectly, Many of the participating individuals were unaware they were dealing with the agency. This was a pretty screwed up thing for the U.S. government to have done. Apparently, Ken Kesey, who was the author of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, volunteered for the MK Ultra experiments involving LSD and other psychedelic drugs at the VA hospital in Menlo Park while he was studying at Stanford, which also would inspire him to promote the use of LSD outside of the MK Ultra, influencing the early hippie movement. Robert Hunter, who was a lyricist, singer-songwriter, translator, and poet, who worked with Jerry Garcia in the Grateful Dead, was another early volunteer for the as subject at Stanford. He was paid to take LSD, placebo, and mescaline to report their experiences. Boston mobster James Whitey Bulger volunteered for testing while in prison at USP Leavenworth. Now the thing is, there's no evidence that this actually worked. As far as we know, it didn't. But it definitely happened, and the U.S. government did make a concerted effort to hide it, even from itself. I mean, the generals in charge tried to destroy all of the records of the experiment. To cover up what they were doing, and failed miserably. There are Supreme Court transcripts, there are congressional transcripts proving this happened. You don't need an elaborate conspiracy with no evidence. These are real conspiracies that did happen, that are widely documented. Other things, and I gotta get going because I gotta go to work. But let me just leave you with a thought. Yeah, the U.S. government's still doing stuff like this. There's no question in my mind of that. The other governments are doing things like this. There's no question in my mind of that. But the reality is, the government is better at keeping secrets than people think it is. Most of I'll give you another example of a conspiracy theory real quick, because I do have a little bit of time. But a conspiracy theory that worked in the way exactly opposite of the way everyone thinks it did. There's a bunch of questions about Roswell itself, but in terms of the UFO sightings, particularly in the 70s and 60s, 50s, even to some extent the 80s, if you look through our culture, there's a lot of sightings in this time period. You notice what else happened in this time period? This is the height of the Cold War. We now know, because of declassified documents, that while the U.S. government may not have started the UFO craze, they certainly took advantage of it to hide various espionage actions they were taking against the Soviet Union. There's even some evidence that what may have crashed at Roswell was a piece of human spy technology we were using on the Russians, and we spread the story of the aliens to cover it up, particularly because we didn't want the Soviets to know, and we knew that they had spies working in the U.S. and the U.S. government. My point is, if the U.S. government was really conducting something this secret and this illegal, they're much smarter about cleaning it up. And they're much more ruthless about cleaning it up. Revealing classified information is considered a treasonous offense and punishable by death in most countries, including the United States. If these generals and things were really revealing classified information about UFOs and things of that nature, the government would be doing something about it. They wouldn't be just letting people speak. The other possibility being that they're letting people speak, but they're also having a dozen more people out there saying complete nonsense just to cover up the three things. There's two real guys saying something true and 100 guys, so you spread 100 guys saying something that's complete bullshit, so the truth gets lost in the noise. That's entirely possible. It's been done before. My point being, just don't take conspiracies too seriously. There are real shady things that go on in the world, but a lot of the times the truth is simpler than people think it is. But I need to get going. I do have to be at work tonight. I do want to remind everybody, tune in tomorrow, 8 o'clock till I don't know when, because I'm off tomorrow night. We're going to be doing some sort of Halloween special. Don't know entirely what I'm going to do yet. I may just sit around and tell a bunch of ghost stories. But I will be here live. Until then, have a good night, everybody.